Hey guys, tonight we step into the darkest corner of history,
Follow my lead.
where the shadow of the Tower of London in 1536 still lingers in every breeze. At the very moment the blade fell, Queen Anne Boleyn's lips were still moving in silent prayer, blood spattering everywhere, and the crowd cheered as if watching a royal execution drama. You won't survive this if you think you can remain unshaken by what you're about to hear. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Now, as the lights grow dim and a gentle breeze drifts through the window, we will together uncover 101 truths about Anne Boleyn. Things not everyone knows, or not everyone dares to speak. Prepare to touch the darkest corners of royal history, beginning with childhood secrets, and even the physical imperfections that haunted her all her life. Truth 1. Far from the image of a glamorous queen, Anne very likely had an extra finger, not a cute little pinky, but a sixth digit on her right hand. She was always careful to conceal this flaw with long sleeves and delicate hand poses whenever she posed, especially in portraits commissioned by the English court. Many contemporary sources mention her unusual hands. One account even asserts she had a projecting tooth beneath her lip, along with 6 fingers. These seemingly minor details instantly became weapons for her opponents, who claimed that these anomalies were the mark of the devil, a cruel accusation designed to smear her character and undermine her reputation before the public. Truth 2. If you think Anne Boleyn was the court's most celebrated beauty, I think again. Completely opposed to the myth of a radiant beauty. Diplomats of the time described her as having pale skin, a large goiter, and a modest bust. In the memoirs of a Venetian envoy, he asserted she was not among the loveliest in the world. A Spanish ambassador was even more brutal, describing her complexion as 1, her neck as long, her mouth as wide, and claiming she possessed nothing but the English king's appetite. Notably, these were not baseless rumors, but official diplomatic dispatches sent back to foreign courts. All this points to one thing. Anne's true power did not stem from her appearance, but from her keen intellect and inner charisma. She conquered Henry not with beauty, but with intelligence, hidden charm, and political savvy. Truth 3. Before Anne entered the royal palace, her elder sister Mary Boleyn was Henry VIII's first official mistress. Mary was passed around at the French court to such an extent that she earned the nickname the English Mare, due to her liaisons with various foreign nobles. When Mary returned to England, Henry VIII immediately took her as his mistress, and she bore him at least 1 child, some sources even say 2. Anne, witnessing her sister discarded, once Henry grew bored, learned a brutal lesson of the royal bargain in the struggle for power. A woman's body is merely a political commodity, and once it has outlived its use, she is mercilessly discarded. The image of Mary once desired across Europe, ultimately abandoned in the heart of the court, etched itself deeply into Anne's mind, driving her to hone her own survival skills and craft her own path. Fact 4. Thomas Boleyn, father of Mary and Anne, not only quietly tolerated but directly orchestrated the script for his family's ambition for power. Surviving correspondence reveals that he coached his daughters in every gesture, from how to stand and sit to the exact style of their attire, even down to how to plant a kiss to impress the king. He operated a high-end brokerage firm in which his 2 daughters became the merchandise offered into the royal court. Mary, with her more readily available charms, was pushed forward first as an introductory act. Anne, however, it was planned as the special reward, the most precious prize, to be presented once Mary had become devalued, promising everything wonderful but skillfully withholding to stoke Henry's desire and absolute admiration. This strategy was both ruthless and cunning, Parents and family transformed the bodies of these two girls into political tools, where love and lust were mercilessly commercialized. Fact 5. At just 12 years of age, Anne was sent to France to serve Queen Claude, a place often called an elite finishing school, but in reality a wild swamp of court intrigue. There, the ladies-in-waiting were unprotected and constantly at risk of sexual exploitation by court officials and powerful nobles. Anne witnessed her peers being coerced into relations, becoming pregnant, and having their honor shattered in a single night, their pregnancies concealed in silent shame. These lessons in surviving such a brutal environment were in no book. They were etched into Anne's mind through the silent tears and hushed sobs of her fellow victims. From dodging unwanted advances to learning how to shield her friends, Anne gradually honed her survival skills, understanding that in a queen's household, only those who knew how to protect themselves stood a chance of living. Fact 6. At the French court under Francis I, Anne also witnessed the emperor's consorts being openly displayed like living jewels. They wore their own jewelry, lived in designated apartments, and, when summoned, served in the bed of the emperor or his ministers. Yet that power was as fragile as a spider's silk. Many of these women died in childbirth or were discarded once their beauty faded. From this, Anne learned the harshest lesson. A woman's power is always temporary and perilous, built on the fragile foundations of her appearance and the favor of those in power. Once she was no longer beautiful in the eyes of the strong, she would be cast aside without mercy. Continuing our journey into secrets few dare to speak of, we arrive at Fact 7. Anne's mother, Elizabeth Howard, carried possibly illicit royal blood. Many historians suspect she was the hidden daughter of Edward IV, King of York. If true, Anne was not merely the daughter of a nobleman, but potentially of the English royal line itself, a lineage that made her a dangerous target for those fearing her claim. This secret ancestry was tightly guarded by the Howard family and spread only by rumor, yet it helps explain Anne's unrelenting ambition for the crown. Fact 8. The Boleyn family motto was, "Whatever I wish. I command," the Latin phrase, "Si je veux." Je commande, I wish. I command was not only carved into family crests and draperies, but ingrained in Anne's psyche from childhood. She was taught that power did not come from status or beauty, but from an iron will and the skillful art of manipulation. That belief transformed Anne from a humble girl into a woman who dared to challenge both the Pope and the King of England. Fact 9. By the age of 15, Anne was fluent in at least 3 languages: English, French, and Latin. While her contemporaries practiced needlework, Anne immersed herself in books and language tutors. This linguistic prowess allowed her to read diplomatic correspondence, overhear political schemes, and communicate secretly with Europe's most powerful figures. Even Henry VIII acknowledged her as an intellectual adversary not to be underestimated. Fact 10. It was no coincidence that Anne was once betrothed to the nephew of the Duke of Orleans before she captured Henry VIII's attention. That promising engagement was abruptly dissolved by royal command when the king realized Anne was the true prize in his heart. Henry's order to break the betrothal not only demonstrated his absolute power, but confirmed Anne's dominant position in the Game of Thrones, becoming the central figure in his quest for royal advantage and legal divorce from Catherine. Now, imagine you and I are opening the Boleyn family's forbidden diary. Truth 11. You'll get goosebumps at the rumor that Henry VIII once fell for Elizabeth Howard, Anne's mother. In other words, the notorious king conquered 2 generations of the same family. This tactic is more horrifying than any conspiracy theory the mother, though already ensnared by Henry's charms, still encouraged her daughter into the web of power. They say Elizabeth deliberately pushed Anne forward to secure her family's political future. Truth 12. While her elder sister Mary quickly yielded to royal power, Anne played the game of give him kisses, but not her body for nearly 7 years. She allowed Henry to touch her, to kiss her, even to hold her hand. yet never offered a single moment of true intimacy. The result was a king blinded by desire, like a moth circling a flame, yet too spellbound to dart away. Truth 13. To sate his longing, Henry put pen to paper, sending Anne 17 pleading love letters. Please let me know expressly your whole mind as to the love between us two. These were not romantic declarations, but proof of the madness consuming Europe's greatest monarch under the live thrall of love. In these letters, he promised triumphant honours, priceless jewels, even noble titles, anything for just one moment of her favour. Truth 14. Anne did not hide these trophies. She wore a dainty locket at her throat, filled with his desperate letters, a testament to her absolute power. Each time she lightly touched it, opened the clasp, and read a passage before the court, she publicly flaunted Henry's dependence as the most precious jewel. Courtiers, witnessing the spectacle, must have wondered, little queen, can you hear the king's cries echoing from inside that locket? Truth 15. Discard all legends of premarital innocence. Anne had already been a prize for Henry Percy during her engagement, and she had given herself to various French nobles while serving at the French court. In an era when a woman's purity was deemed her greatest asset, she cunningly turned her lack of virginity into a political weapon, rendering Henry utterly powerless. Instead of using her chastity as protection, Anne wielded it as a masterstroke, leaving the king completely captivated. And that is only the beginning of the forbidden blacklist of 101 shocking truths about Anne Boleyn. Continuing our journey into the secrets few dare to speak, we arrive at the twists that shook all of Europe. Fact 16. Henry did not merely swap wives like changing clothes for the day. He swapped the entire religion of England. In order to marry Anne, Henry declared an end to his ties with the Roman Church, broke 600 years of Catholic tradition, and established the Church of England with himself at its head. Anne, crowned the most expensive woman in Europe, became the spark for the English Reformation, paving the way for decades of religious conflict. She was not a woman hiding behind the scenes, but the general pulling the strings, dismantling every religious bond to open the path for royal power to seize people's faith. Fact 17. It sounds like something out of a horror movie. Pope Clement VII, the supreme leader of Catholicism, did not hesitate to mock Anne in official correspondence with vicious terms like concubine and trumpet of licentiousness. Not content with insults, he also called on the entire Catholic court to raise arms and eliminate the heretic defiling God's throne. Anne was not only excommunicated from the church, but placed on the papal hit list. It was as if she had stepped straight out of a crime novel, forced to face assassination plots from the most powerful figures in Christendom. Fact 18. On her coronation day in June of 1533, Anne appeared with her pregnant belly on full display, as if to declare, "Here is the proof that Catherine could not give him." The procession paraded through London like a triumphant trophy, simultaneously celebrating and confessing a scandalous adultery. The sight of the Queen striding in her lavish coronation robes, her abdomen swollen like a balloon, proclaiming her sin, ignited outrage across the city. Some onlookers gasped in awe. Others screamed in anger. The men moaned in regret, and the women exchanged looks of loathing. The palace became an arena where Anne both donned her crown and bared her body history's darkest display of power. Even these three truths alone prove that Anne Boleyn was no passive noblewoman, but a storm of political, religious, and sexual upheaval that rocked all of Europe. Stay tuned for the next secrets, as the Queen's portrait is stripped bare, revealing every hidden shadow no one dares mention. Continuing our journey into the secrets few dare to speak, we arrive at truths that reveal the public's fury and the king's dark obsessions. Fact 19. Instead of cheers and celebration, the streets of London fell into a deathly silence as Anne processed through the city. Citizens kept their hats on and refused to bow, as if witnessing a funeral. They still mourned the benevolent Catherine and despised Anne as the destroyer of the royal family. Fact 20 newsstands hawked obscene caricatures depicting Anne with devil's horns, birthing monsters, and tormented by demons. These prints were sold like loaves of bread. Children bought them with pocket money, and priests used them as sermon illustrations. Hatred turned into commerce, and the Queen's humiliation became someone else's profit. Fact 21. Henry spent what would be millions today to stage Anne's coronation. He invited artists from across Europe, designed elaborate fountains, and installed wine-spewing spouts throughout the streets. He threw money to buy front-row seats. But he could not purchase affection. The spectacle only deepened public scorn. Fact 22. After giving birth to Elizabeth in September of 1533, Anne miscarried 3 more times. Each reproductive failure was not only a personal tragedy, but also a political earthquake, the death of every hope for a male heir. The court watched her belly, physicians logged every detail, and foreign ambassadors reported back to their sovereigns. When the bleeding began, panic mounted, pushing Anne closer to the execution block. Fact 23. In January of 1536, one miscarriage produced a grotesquely deformed male fetus, complete with extra limbs and hideous malformations. Many saw it as divine judgment, proof that Anne's marriage was cursed. Henry regarded the mutilated remains as a blood-written ultimatum. Fact 24. Rather than seek medical explanations, Henry blamed Anne's harsh temperament. He claimed that her sharp tongue, fierce will, and independent spirit were killing his sons in the womb. The very qualities that had captivated him now marked Anne as a hostile force, destroying his lineage. Henry ordered her to remain meek and silent throughout her pregnancies, turning her into a passive childbearing machine. Fact 25. The hypothesis that Henry suffered from syphilis emerged. His chronic leg ulcers, paranoid rages, and sexual dysfunction matched tertiary stage symptoms of the disease. If true, Henry was not only a tyrant, but a mind eroded by bacteria, forcing Anne to share a bed with a man whose brain was rotting from within, controlled by disease rather than reason. Let us turn the page once more into the darkest intrigues. Fact 26. If Henry indeed suffered from syphilis, the disease could cause both Catherine's and Anne's miscarriages and fetal deformities. His infection destroyed their pregnancies. Yet he blamed and punished his wives for failures of his own making. Fact 27. Some historians argue that Anne was pregnant at the time of her execution. Henry reported nausea, bodily changes, and Henry's urgency to proceed with the beheading may have concealed the crime of killing an unborn child. If true, Henry would be guilty of fetal genocide. Fact 28. Within Anne's household were numerous ladies-in-waiting who had been intimate with courtiers, turning her inner circle into a high-class brothel. Her enemies seized on this to accuse the Queen of transforming the palace into a den of debauchery, reinforcing claims of her corruption and moral decay. Fact 29. Anne retained the jester Will Somers, who openly mocked King Henry as fat and impotent, staging performances that ridiculed the bloated, ineffective monarch. Often in the Queen's own presence, Anne laughed and encouraged these jokes, turning the royal court into a theatre of public derision at the king's expense. Fact 30. Finally, she was accused of adultery with 5 men simultaneously, complete with secret plots, coded handkerchiefs, and clandestine signals. The alleged timings and locations are so impossible that they reveal this to have been a fabricated drama, contrived solely to legitimize the death sentence. Let us lift the veil on even darker conspiracies. Fact 31. One of the 5 alleged lovers was Anne's own brother, George Boleyn. They fabricated incest charges with obscene details, too scandalous for public trial. So the accusations were recorded behind closed courtroom doors. The purpose was not genuinely to prosecute incest, but to destroy Anne's reputation at any cost. Fact 32. Mark Smeaton, a court musician, was tortured until he delivered false confessions. The records do not specify the methods of torture, but within hours, a man who had maintained his innocence was compelled to admit to crimes he could not have committed. The combination of physical and psychological torture turned him into a tool for securing executions. Fact 33. Smeaton's coerced testimony became the evidence used to arrest and execute Henry Norris, Francis Weston, William Brereton, and George Boleyn. When Smeaton attempted to retract his confession under the weight of guilt, the court refused, declaring his words lawfully obtained, and thus sealing the fate of those 5 innocent men. Fact 34. Throughout the trial, not a single piece of physical evidence was presented. No love letters, no eyewitness testimony, no proof of any plot to murder the king. The entire prosecution rested on forced confessions and rumours. In any fair and serious trial, the lack of evidence should have led to acquittal, but here it only underscored how the proceedings had been rigged. Fact 35. Even before the charges were announced, Henry had already chosen Jane Seymour to be his next queen. Court letters and records show Jane being outfitted with royal robes, jewellery, and private apartments as early as January 1536, when Anne had just suffered a miscarriage. This reveals that Anne's execution had been planned in advance, and the charges were merely a facade to legitimise the murder. Fact 36. Anne was brought to trial in the Great Hall of the Tower of London, the very place where she had once been crowned. From glory to death sentence, within the same walls, beneath the same hung banners, before the same assembly of courtiers. This psychological torment was designed to remind her and everyone present that she had fallen from queen to criminal in the very spot where she had once stood as monarch. Fact 37. One day before Anne's execution, her brother George Boleyn was led to the block, and she was ordered to watch from a tower window. She witnessed George's head drop to the scaffold's floor, blood pooling in the very place where she herself would stand the next day. That living nightmare drove Anne deeper into despair. Fact 38. From her very first escort into royal custody, Anne endured 18 days of agonizing confinement, not in a damp dungeon, but in the opulent apartments once reserved for her before her coronation. She looked out on carpenters erecting her own scaffold. I heard saws cutting wood, and listened to the city's bustle beyond while she waited for death. Fact 39. The women assigned to attend her in those final days included Lady Kingston and other nobles once loyal to Catherine. They were not companions, but spies, reporting every gesture and whispered word back to court. Every story she told, every smile, every rest was meticulously recorded, waiting for proof that the witch had revealed her true nature. Fact 40. According to Lady Kingston's notes, Anne constantly asked whether the blow would hurt, whether the French executioner's sword would be sharp enough to cut cleanly, or that the pain would linger. She touched her waist, pressed her hand to her neck, imagining the swing of the blade. Once the most powerful woman in Europe, she had become a frightened girl seeking the mercy of a quick end. Fact 41. Even facing death, Anne maintained her innocence, refusing to confess to adultery, incest, or treason. On the scaffold, she praised Henry as a most gentle lord, her final words offering grace for her daughter Elizabeth. She understood that admitting guilt would condemn Elizabeth's claim forever. By dying innocent, she spared her child from permanent disgrace. Fact 42. Anne's execution was set for May 19th, 1536. But before dawn, the French executioner arrived late. She donned her death garments, recited her final lines, only to be told again to wait. Again and again. In mounting terror, each postponement forced her to relive the horror of impending death. multiplying her agony. Take a steady breath, for we are about to move from the horrific to the utterly astonishing. Fact 43. In her final moments, Anne donned a smoky grey damask gown, not the black of mourning, but a blend of luxury and allure, tailored with a neckline cut wide enough to expose the gateway to death where the blade would strike. This sumptuous dress served as a final declaration of authority even as her life ended. Yet that exposed curve at her throat stood as proof of her fatal vulnerability, the battlefield where the sword and the last vestiges of life would meet. Fact 44. The ritual of tipping the executioner was no mere formality. Anne herself drew from her robes a small purse containing 23 English gold coins and handed it to her executioner as the ultimate final act. With this payment, she bought the hope of a swift, clean cut rather than a prolonged agony, essentially. Insurance on her own death. Fact 45. Rather than have someone else blindfold her, Anne gently tied the veil over her own eyes, asserting control over her final moment. The same cloth that had wiped away her deepest tears now held the last secret between her and the coming blade, preventing her eyes from witnessing the final horror. Fact 46. The French swordsman concealed his blade behind his back to prevent Anne from flinching. While she whispered her last prayer, the sword was silently raised and fell. In an instant, its swiftness so complete that many witnesses did not even realize the deed was done. Some recounted that her head rolled a few paces away, her eyes still open as if trying to finish the prayer she had begun. Fact 47. No grand coffin awaited the fallen queen. Anne's body was hastily stuffed into an ammunition chest, meant for surplus military supplies, far too small for a queen. She was folded awkwardly, her limbs bent unnaturally, and her head placed roughly beside her torso like a damaged piece of cargo. Fact 48. Less than 24 hours after the blade fell, Henry VIII married Jane Seymour in a hastily arranged ceremony. Anne's body was still warm, bloodstains still dark on the wooden floor. When Jane donned Anne's jewellery, as though parading a newly captured trophy, King Henry danced upon his former wife's grave, amid the smirks of those who treated life and death as mere entertainment. Fact 49. Immediately after the execution, Parliament declared Elizabeth Anne's daughter a royal bastard. Stripping her of all titles and rights of succession, the 3-year-old child suddenly became a pariah in the court, forced to grow up among those who eyed her with suspicion and cruelty, a living reminder of her mother's alleged treason. Fact 50. Parliament then passed legislation making any mention of Anne Boleyn an act of treason. Historical records, correspondence, and portraits were either expunged or left deliberately blank. All objects associated with her were confiscated, and anyone caught retaining them risked execution. This was nothing less than an act of historical genocide, intended to erase Anne Boleyn entirely from the national memory. Now, let the final curtain fall on the Boleyn legacy as we unveil the aftermath of their obliteration. Fact 51. Immediately after Anne's execution, the Boleyn family faced total destruction. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, was stripped of his power, his lands confiscated, and he spent his final months in isolation and regret. Her mother, Elizabeth Howard, vanished from the historical record, many believing she died of grief. Thus ended the tumultuous saga of a family that once sought glory through the bodies of its daughters. Fact 52. Every member of Anne's household ladies-in-waiting, Wertnurses, even her grooms, was subjected to baseless interrogation. They were tortured until they testified that their mistress had committed adultery. Many were imprisoned indefinitely or simply vanished from the chronicles. Anyone daring to defend Anne faced death, leaving the royal household devastated and bereft of loyalty. Fact 53. Anne's personal possessions, her jewellery, clothing, and books were seized and redistributed to Jane Seymour, while Anne's body still lay warm in an arm's chest. Every gemstone was re-engraved with Jane's initial, her books inscribed with a new owner's name, The Queen's finest gowns were hastily altered to clothe her successor. Fact 54. At Jane Seymour's wedding, held just 2 days after Anne's death, Henry VIII did not hesitate to adorn his new bride with the very jewels that had decorated the Queen who had just been beheaded. The ceremony became a grisly showroom of conquest, cementing Jane's status while obliterating any remnant of mourning for Anne. Fact 55. To erase all traces of Anne. Henry even backdated the paperwork for his engagement and marriage to Jane, making it appear as if their union preceded Anne's trial, transforming the affair into a seamless administrative procedure devoid of any spousal execution. All court documents and chronicles were doctored to remove every reference to Anne, an extraordinary campaign to annihilate both her and her influence from England's history. Imagine the walls themselves, conspiring to erase her memory, yet her spirit refuses to be silenced. Fact 56. The royal court ordered painters to swiftly swipe over Anne's portraits, overlaying her face with that of Jane Seymour. The resulting images were crude and jarring, but effective Anne was wiped from every palace wall as if she had never existed. Fact 57. Just 10 days after her execution, night guards at the Tower of London reported seeing a headless figure, a woman dressed in ash-grey Tudor attire, her wet footsteps trailing across the scaffold. A low, mournful whisper followed her like a curse from a restless soul. Fact 58. Witnesses maintain that Anne's ghost often carries her own severed head, drifting around the tower like an avenger seeking justice. This apparition is anything but peaceful. It throbs with rage and sorrow, a spectral reenactment of her final moments that proclaims her wrongful death for all to see. Fact 59. Women, especially female guards, frequently encounter Anne's spirit, described as a sigh on the wind, her eyes imbued with both grief and warning. Her apparition seems to whisper a cautionary message to all women. Beware the ruthless power of men who hold your life in their hands. Fact 60. It is not only commoners but also military officers, nobles, and foreign dignitaries who have chronicled encounters with Anne's ghost over the centuries. Skeptics of the supernatural have nonetheless unanimously confirmed the Tower of London is haunted by a headless Tudor spectre, undeniable evidence that her story cannot be buried. Fact 61. After her hasty execution, Anne's body was not given a grand burial, but was instead shoved into an armoury chest and interred anonymously beneath the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. For centuries, her tomb lay among countless unmarked graves, and pilgrims wandered above, without ever knowing they tread upon the resting place of a former queen. Fact 62. In the year 1876, Victorian archaeologists digging beneath the altar made a startling discovery, a skeleton matching 16th century descriptions to a remarkable degree. The cervical vertebrae showed a clean, precise cut. Fragments of grey damask fabric clung between the ribs, and tiny pieces of jewellery lay nearby, all unmistakable evidence that the remains belonged to Anne Boleyn. Fact 63. Moved by this revelation, Queen Victoria ordered a full royal reburial. For the first time in 340 years, Anne's remains were exhumed and honoured, with ceremonial grandeur transforming her from a traitor in the eyes of history into a rightful Queen of England once more. Fact 64. Yet even with her body laid to rest in regal dignity, Anne's spirit refused to be at peace. In the years that followed, supernatural occurrences around her new burial site surged, as though she still watched over the living, determined to see justice done for her unjust fate. Fact 65. Well into the late 20th century, Tower of London guards continued to file mysterious reports, whispered voices echoing in empty corridors, sudden icy drafts near Anne's tomb, and the uncanny feeling of unseen eyes upon them. All these accounts were carefully recorded under unexplained events, awaiting the day when a fitting explanation might finally honour the greatest victim in the annals of the English monarchy. Fact 66. Anne's execution set a chilling precedent in English law. Never before had a crowned queen been legally beheaded for treason. She remains the first and only English queen to undergo a state trial and secret execution under charges of high treason. Fact 67. 2 years later, Henry VIII would recycle the same formula to eliminate his fifth wife, Catherine Howard. He levelled adultery accusations, tortured her ladies-in-waiting, staged a public beheading, and immediately married his next bride. This became the Tudor protocol for discarding any wife who fell out of favour. Fact 68. In subsequent high-profile trials, Lady Jane Grey, Mary, Queen of Scots, and even King Charles I, English legal scholars cited Anne's case as the blueprint. They used treason statutes to justify the execution of privileged royals and to shatter the old divine right paradigm. Fact 69. News of the Anne Boleyn model spread throughout Europe. Courts everywhere adopted the playbook fabricate evidence, torture witnesses into false confessions, stage a public execution under the banner of justice, and then remarry at once. The Tudor legal darkness rolled across the continent, paving the way for political graves dug in courtrooms from Paris to Prague. Fact 70. And what of her daughter, Elizabeth I? She ruled for 45 years as the Virgin Queen, not solely from political design, but haunted by her mother's fate. Elizabeth understood that marriage meant risking execution if she failed to produce a son, an inheritance of terror that shaped her lifelong commitment to solitude. Let's turn the page to the legacy Anne left in her daughter's court. Fact 71. Elizabeth I was forced to collaborate with the very judges, magistrates, and courtiers who had condemned her mother. She lived under constant suspicion, measuring every word to avoid being labelled a dangerous queen in her own right. Fact 72. Throughout her 45-year reign, Elizabeth referred to her mother only by euphemisms, the late queen or the mother of my people, never uttering Anne's name aloud. The pain buried deep in her heart made her fearful to acknowledge the royal blood she had inherited. Fact 73. Once the Church of England was firmly established, Protestant historians and theologians recast Anne as a martyr of the Reformation rather than merely a royal mistress. She was elevated to the status of a saint of reform, celebrated for her religious convictions and sacrifice. Fact 74. In contrast, Catholic Europe continued to depict Anne as a witch. Church art and pamphlets portrayed her with devil's horns, subjected to infernal torture, reinforcing her image as a demonic corrupter of Christendom. These depictions served as cautionary illustrations of pagan corruption. Fact 75. Modern scholarship has conclusively proven that the entire case against Anne was fabricated. No credible evidence existed. Every confession was coerced through torture, and the trial was rigged from start to finish. Anne's fate stands as a classic judicial tragedy, where the law itself became the instrument of elimination. Take a deep breath, for we are about to reach the heart of the most brutal tragedy in Anne Boleyn's journey, where the final truths reveal the merciless motives behind every charge. Fact 76. Anne's only crime was not adultery or incest, but her failure to bear a son, the desperate longing of Henry VIII. Every accusation of treason, incest, or immorality was merely legal smokescreen, a shield erected to justify a death sentence born of reproductive disappointment. When she could not give the king his most coveted heir, a male child, she instantly became the single guilty person to be destroyed. Fact 77. If you follow the timeline closely, you will see that Henry decided to have Anne executed immediately after her devastating miscarriage in January of 1536. In fact, just days after the loss of the male fetus, Henry began his power pivot toward Jane Seymour. From that moment, the charges of adultery and incest were gradually perfected, cementing justice for the removal of a failed wife. That alone shows the entire trial was premeditated, waiting only for the right moment to strike. Fact 78. The 5 men accused as Anne's lovers, Mark Smeaton, Henry Norris, Francis Weston, William Brereton, and George Boleyn, were all wholly innocent. They were political pawns set on the Tudor chessboard. ready to be sacrificed to legitimize the king's heinous decree. Young Mark Smeaton, the court musician, endured torture until he confessed to a crime he could not have committed. Loyal courtier Henry Norris had every shred of evidence denied. Francis Weston and William Brereton were executed merely to adorn the crown's script, and George Boleyn, Anne's own brother, became the victim of the most heinous incest allegation. All of this was fabricated to create the criminal plot Henry needed to justify his blade. Fact 79. Anne Boleyn was far more than a royal beauty. She was one of the very few women of the 16th century to receive a comprehensive education. Her personal library contained over 200 volumes, ranging from theological treatises and political works to French poetry and Latin texts. Far surpassing many contemporary institutions, she mastered 3 languages, her native English, fluent French, and scholarly Latin. Anne did not read for mere decoration. She engaged in debates with scholars, evaluated state policy, drafted diplomatic correspondence, and even read the Pope's letters in secret. Her intellectual power made her a genuine political weapon, one no one dared to acknowledge unless they were determined to destroy her at any cost. Fact 80. Anne's religious convictions were not mere show for the court. She filled her personal Bible with extensive marginal notes on the original texts, personally protected reformist scholars from persecution, and organized clandestine theological lectures for noble women. She encouraged the translation of scripture into English so that all lay people could access the word. At a time when the Latin Church sought to suppress reform, Anne posed a far greater threat to papal authority than even her husband, the self-styled Lord of England. Fact 81. Anne's legacy spread throughout the British Empire to the New World. Henry's establishment of an independent Church of England, a direct consequence of his marriage to Anne, paved the way for royal divorce and granted the monarch legislative authority over religion. In just 3 short years as the Tudor Queen, she ignited a chain reaction that lasted for centuries, from the birth of Protestant denominations to the colonial policies in North America, and later the rule of law in English-speaking nations, both Britain and the United States. Once part of the Crown, have benefited from the legal frameworks and traditions born of the religious revolution. Anne unwittingly set in motion, and this is not the end. There are still 21 more shocking facts to be revealed in the coming installments, secrets about DNA testing left unresolved, the enduring legacy of Elizabeth the Great, and those final details that will leave the world in disbelief over Anne Boleyn's story. Brace yourselves to venture deeper into the darkest corners, where justice and power clash in every drop of blood. Relax your shoulders. For now, we are about to step into the final secrets, where fragments of history have never wanted to be revealed. Truth 82. Modern DNA technology can lift the veil of mystery surrounding Anne Boleyn's makeshift tomb. In the year 1876, archaeologists discovered a skeleton beneath the altar of St. Peter ad Vincula. And ever since, the great question has lingered. Could that really be Anne? The woman who changed the course of England's religion. Today, with advanced gene sequencing techniques, scientists can compare the bone samples to the DNA of descendants of the Howard family, direct ancestors of Anne's mother, and deliver a definitive answer. A perfect match would end over 3 centuries of speculation, whereas a mismatch would completely overturn our understanding of the Queen's resting place. Truth 83. Yet the Church of England has refused every call for DNA testing. They invoke reasons ranging from protecting consecrated ground to respecting ancestral heritage, as if any scientific inquiry were a violation of the sacred. Many experts believe the real motive is not religious at all, but rather that the Church and the Crown are unwilling to expose further controversial truths about the origins of their power. This refusal has become an invisible shield, keeping Anne's story forever half-told. Even as the world stands ready to illuminate it with the light of science. Truth 84. Anne's true legacy lies not in suspended sentences or political chaos, but in her daughter Elizabeth. Every sacrifice and agony Anne endured culminated in the glorious reign of the Virgin Queen who ruled for 45 years. Under Elizabeth's dynasty, England rose to maritime supremacy, defeated the legendary Spanish Armada, ushered in the Shakespeare Marlowe cultural era, and left an indelible mark on Western civilization. Had Anne's bloody marriage to Henry VIII not occurred, England might never have become so formidable, and without Elizabeth, the Anglo-American Renaissance may never have blossomed with such brilliance over the centuries. Truth 85. Before mounting the scaffold, Anne insisted on confessing her sins to a French priest, steadfastly refusing the Anglican clergy, appointed by her own husband. This act was not merely a desire for spiritual dignity, but a statement of her determination to maintain her spiritual bond with the French tradition and the Reformed Catholicism she had once championed. Though the Church of England had branded her a traitor and stripped her of her religious rights, Anne resolutely sought out the hands that had guided her childhood in France, hands that had taught her to defend her faith. Truth 86. Legend has it that, according to royal custom, Anne's heart was removed and buried separately, a vivid image that cannot be confirmed, but remains indelible in the imagination of later generations. Her body was hastily tucked into an armament's chest, her head placed alongside fragments of skull, and her heart may have been laid to rest in some hidden recess of the Tower of London. Though no official record survives, the tale endures as a final symbol of a life shattered by ruthless politics, a heart cleft in pieces. Much like her fate, and her life were torn between power and love. Close your eyes and imagine a Tudor fashion tableau with Anne Boleyn as the unexpected trendsetter, simultaneously elegant and satirical toward every stereotype of powerful women. Fact 87. Before she became the spring consort in the reign of Henry VIII, Anne quietly pioneered the bob haircut, simply to tuck her long locks under a French hood. Unbeknownst to her, that pragmatic choice sowed the seeds of England's first short hair craze. At first, the nobility stared and snickered, as though Anne were trying to steal the court barbers' livelihoods. Yet within a single season, from ladies-in-waiting to duchesses, the bob reigned supreme, an under-the-radar assault on the elaborate conventions of feminine fashion. Anne proved not only that she could command style, but also that she could redefine femininity itself, simply by wearing her hair short and with authority. Fact 88. Anne's coronation was not merely a royal ceremony, but a 7-hour psychological warfare campaign, Henry VIII's gambit to win hearts through endurance. Londoners were forced to stand roasting under the midsummer sun, sweat pouring yet smooth-sealed. Instead of cheers, they maintained deadly silence, not even doffing a hat, proof that no one can be forced to love a parade of gilded carriages. That silent standoff shattered Henry's showmanship the more millions he spent by today's standards. The clearer it became that wealth cannot purchase affection. In the end, the grand procession stood as living proof of an old adage: you cannot make a heart weep on command. Fact 89. Anne Boleyn became the first English queen to face public execution, a horrifying precedent that shattered all notions of a queen's inviolability. Until then, queens quietly succumbed to illness or childbirth. None had ever been beheaded in the streets. When the executioner's sword severed Anne's head, the public witnessed a brutal political play yesterday, enthroned, today branded a public criminal. From that point on, any royal woman risked the gallows if her husband's favour turned to fury. Fact 90. The French sword that felled Anne's head remains on display at the Tower of London as a tourist attraction where crowds clamour for selfies with the very instrument of her death. Picture bewildered visitors snapping photos with that rusted blade, which 500 years ago claimed a queen's life. What once served as Tudor justice now endures as a soulless souvenir, a testament to public fascination with violence. Everyone wants a memento of the forbidden, as though visiting a grisly museum where glory and atrocity meet in cold relief. These 4 facts may be mere brushstrokes in the sprawling portrait of 101 shocking truths about Anne Boleyn. Yet each detail reveals another facet of power, intrigue, and public opinion. This is the story of a woman who not only harnessed royal authority, but also shaped fashion trends, challenged ceremony, and forced the public to confront crimes within the palace walls. In the curious, startled gazes of Londoners, Anne Boleyn became more than a queen. She became the symbol of an era when justice and cruelty walked hand in hand, forging a tragedy so grand that few dare recount it fully, except those brave enough to uncover the truth. Take a deep breath, for we are about to unveil the least spoken secrets in the dark chronicle of Anne Boleyn. Truth 91. Recent studies suggest that Anne may have been pregnant 5 times. Not just 3, as most histories record. These mysterious miscarriages were concealed with the utmost secrecy, at least one so carefully hidden that not a single royal physician spoke a word. Each agonizing loss was borne in silence, as Anne stifled her grief in order to maintain her standing at court. She hid the bruises and the crippling cramps beneath sumptuous gowns, sacrificing her own well-being so that the throne and her daughter Elizabeth's future would never be compromised. Truth 92. Beyond her roles as politician and religious symbol, Anne was also a gifted poet, a facet of her life almost erased by history's pen. A handful of stray verses survive in old manuscripts, revealing her mastery of early modern English meter, her use of subtle metaphor, and her graceful command of rhyme. Those poems speak to a soul that cherished freedom and depth, a stark contrast to the austere authority she projected. It may have been this very literary brilliance that made her a threat to those eager to suppress talented women. Truth 93. Anne's famed wedding ring was engraved with the words, "God save the King," a prayer offered directly for the man who would ultimately order her execution. It stands as her bitterest irony she wore on her finger, a blessing for Henry VIII, entrusted him with her heart and her faith, only to watch him decree her death. Each time sunlight caught the stone's facets, she must have remembered how her prayer became a death warrant. Truth 94. Anne's coronation was deliberately scheduled on Whit Sunday, the feast commemorating the Holy Spirit's descent, a moment of intense religious symbolism meant to proclaim divine favor on the new reign. The expectation was that such a sacred ceremony would secure unwavering heavenly endorsement, yet the Catholic faction condemned it as a grave sacrilege, accusing her of exploiting a solemn holy day to seize earthly power. They labelled her actions blasphemy. Further proof that Anne was challenging not only social order, but also the very doctrines of the Roman Church. Imagine, if you will, that you're watching a macabre theatre unfold, one where pageantry and murder blend into a single, choreographed spectacle. Truth 95. The cost of Anne's execution far exceeded even the splendor of her coronation. Henry spared no expense, importing a French executioner's sword, erecting an ornate scaffold, and commissioning lavish decorations, all in the name of upholding justice. Every fleur-de-lis adorned banner, every gilded canopy over the scaffold was paid for with a king's fortune, transforming a grim act of state into an ostentatious royal performance. In effect, Henry invested more in staging this judicial murder than he ever did in celebrating his queen's ascent to the throne. Truth 96. In her final hours, Anne insisted on the ministrations of a French priest refusing absolution from the very Anglican clergy that her husband had installed. This was no mere spiritual preference, but a bold assertion of religious freedom. By rejecting the Church of England's officiants, Anne declared that her soul belonged not to the reformed institution Henry had created, but to the ancient traditions of the Catholic faith she had embraced in her youth. Her last confession thus became a final act of defiance against the very monarchy that condemned her. Truth 97. Legend holds that, in accordance with royal custom, Anne's heart was removed and buried separately from her body, though no official record confirms this. This tale stands as a haunting symbol of her divided legacy, honoured in one breath as a queen, and in the next, literally torn asunder like a pawn in the ruthless game of dynastic politics. Whether or not her heart truly lies interred beneath a secret corner of the tower, The story itself underscores the brutal paradox of a woman venerated in ritual yet dismembered in death. Truth 98 folktales say that Anne's restless spirit appeared to warn Catherine Howard Henry's fifth wife of the tragic fate that awaited any queen who failed to satisfy the king's desires. While this may be nothing more than a ghost story, it speaks volumes about the psychological legacy of Anne's downfall. The spectre of a beheaded predecessor, haunting the very chambers where Henry's later wives dwelled, became an enduring cautionary legend, a supernatural reminder that royal favour is as fragile as life itself, and that history's blood-stained pages could foretell one's own doom. Though these four revelations may seem like mere footnotes in the grand chronicle of Anne Boleyn, they collectively illuminate the grim theatre of power in Tudor England, where financial extravagance, religious conflict, ceremonial mutilation, and spectral law intertwined to seal the fate of a queen. As these final confidences fade into the shadows, remember that the full 101 truths are yet to be revealed, each one a testament to the awe-inspiring and often horrifying complexity of Anne Boleyn's extraordinary life and death. Hold your breath for a moment as we unveil the final revelations in the 101 shocking truths about Anne Boleyn fragments no one dared expose until now. Truth 99. In the Middle Ages, left-handed people were branded as devils. Anne used her left hand just like anyone else. Yet the court seized on this trait as proof she was born marked by darkness. Add to that an extra finger, not a cute little pinky, but a clear sixth digit on her right hand, plus her unconventional appearance and her refusal to kowtow to authority, and she was labelled a witch from childhood. Every flick of her hair, every time she casually used her left hand to write a letter or slip on a ring, became fodder for the Conservatives' cries of "See, she is under evil influence." They exploited the public's fear of heresy to destroy her reputation, turning Anne into a symbol of all the Tudor court's unrest. Truth 100. Anne was not only at the heart of a religious and political revolution, she quietly ignited a culinary revolution as well. Upon becoming queen, she introduced the delicate fork from France, a small but revolutionary innovation. Instead of eating with her fingers, she daintily speared food with a two-tined implement, setting a new courtly standard. Yet the reactionary faction, terrified of anything foreign, denounced it as extravagant affectation, accusing her of frivolous decadence. The fork became a prime example of how her every gesture was exaggerated into scandal. When she uses a fork, she destroys our customs. When she smiles, she mocks her subjects. When she breathes, she spreads reformist ideas. This truth shows that even her smallest innovations were seized upon by opponents to undermine her. Truth 101. Just before mounting the scaffold, Anne requested to recite one final prayer. Jesu, receive my soul, in Latin, the solemn tongue of scholars and martyrs. Refusing both English and French, she chose Latin to underscore her profound grasp of the faith she cherished. This was no naive act by a condemned woman. It was her final manifesto of religious knowledge and human dignity. In that moment, her prayer rang out as proof Anne Boleyn was neither ignorant nor bewitched by power, but a thinker and a spirit ahead of her time, holding fast to her faith in the face of a terrifying fate. And so concludes our journey through the 101 shocking truths about Anne Boleyn, from extra fingers and bobbed hair to the reviled fork and that last Latin prayer. Each seemingly ordinary detail conceals an entire universe of tragedy and power, reflecting the portrait of a woman who dared to challenge every prejudice, even at the cost of her own life. Thank you for staying with us to the very end. And remember, however chilling, the truth always deserves to be told. And so the journey of 101 shocking facts about Anne Boleyn draws to a close, leaving us haunted by power, intrigue, and the ultimate tragedy. Yet when the whisper of the executioner's blade falls silent, the story does not end. Henry VIII husband, whose heart turned to armour England, reels in the grip of a religious crisis. And little Elizabeth, barely a child, is burdened with the stigma of illegitimacy. Now, let us step into the next 4 chapters, where we will trace the path of separation and loss within the Tudor court, to discover how Elizabeth overcame her pain to build a magnificent reign, and finally look back on Anne Boleyn's legacy, from glittering thrones to the spectre that lives on in legend. In the pages ahead, every wound, every hope, and every triumph of resurrection will be revealed, extending the story in a seamless and deeply moving narrative. Part 1. After the storm of Anne, Henry VIII enters a labyrinth of power and grief. Immediately following the verdict condemning Anne Boleyn, the court fell silent, as if all of Europe held its breath for the next tragedy. Henry VIII, the monarch who had once proudly stood at the summit of power, suddenly became more melancholic than ever. His face grew pale, his eyes hollow and sorrowful, signs of the panic attacks that frequently beset him. Rumors of a non-healing sore on his leg, accompanied by bouts of fever and chills, only reinforced suspicions that late-stage syphilis was gradually eroding both his body and mind. The absence of his second wife, also the first he had personally sent to the execution block, left a wound in Henry's heart that would not easily heal. Barely 24 hours after Anne's head had rolled from her shoulders, Henry announced his marriage to Jane Seymour, an act that stunned every courtier. Jane was not only a new face, but was regarded as the most perfect anesthetic, bringing a momentary peace to the king's tormented soul. He wed her in haste to seal off every dark memory, and to escape into the arms of a wife renowned for her gentle nature and absolute loyalty. Jane quickly delivered what Henry had long desired, a male heir to continue the Tudor line. When Prince Edward was born, the king's fleeting happiness was etched across his features. Yet that joy proved brief. When Jane died in childbirth, another tragedy that weighed heavily on Henry's heart and sent his illness surging once more. After burying Jane with the grandest ceremony, Henry announced his intention to remarry Catherine Howard. His youthful and charming cousin swiftly captured the king's affections, but the script of accusation for adultery and execution was soon repeated, causing the same tragic tale to play out again. When Catherine fell from grace, Henry turned to Catherine Parr, an experienced widow of 3 marriages. Catherine not only assumed the role of queen, but also became a strategic advisor, caring for the king in his final years. The relationship between Henry and Catherine closed the bloody circle of his marriages and revealed his unrelenting ambition and political determination. In matters of governance and religion, Henry grew even more ruthless toward Catholicism than he had been in the days of Anne Boleyn. With the Church of England established under the king's supreme authority, Henry used the law to suppress royalist believers. All expressions of support for the Pope were swiftly branded treasonous, plunging the nation into a bloody crisis. The dissolution of bishops and monasteries and the confiscation of church property demonstrated not only his brutal methods of rule, but also his resolve to consolidate absolute royal power. In his final years, Henry VIII faced profound loneliness. In the year 1547, he breathed his last at Hampton Court Palace, leaving behind the wreckage of merciless marriages and a religious reformation fraught with conflict. His final words painted a portrait of a king torn by contradictions, proud of having transformed England into an independent power, yet remorseful for the bloody debts owed to his wives. His will provided detailed instructions for the care of his son and last spouse. But above all, it bequeathed a legacy of solitary judgment. Power may save a kingdom, but it cannot mend a fractured heart. Part 2. Elizabeth I, the solitary child amidst a shattered world. Elizabeth I was only 3 years old when she first felt the ground shift beneath her. In the wake of her mother's downfall, Parliament declared Princess Elizabeth illegitimate, stripping her of her royal title and place in the succession. Imagine a toddler, just learning the comforts of childhood, suddenly told she was no longer the king's daughter. The betrayal cut deep. Trusted servants exchanged sympathetic glances. Courtiers whispered in corners, and young Elizabeth sensed that though charged with her care, now regarded her as a political liability rather than a precious heir. Her early years were spent at Pembroke Palace, and later at Hatfield House remote, quiet estates chosen to keep her isolated. Gone were the familiar halls of Greenwich and the laughter of playmates. Instead, she found herself in empty corridors and on windswept lawns. But isolation bred resilience. Tutors arrived to teach Latin, French, and the rudiments of theology. While other children played games, Elizabeth immersed herself in verse, scripture, and diplomatic correspondence. By age 6, she could read Cicero in the original, and by 8, she was composing letters in elegant French. In the hush of Hatfield's library, a young intellect blossomed. Elizabeth's only consistent familial influence came from her maternal grandmother, Elizabeth Howard, Duchess of Norfolk. The Duchess, herself scarred by court intrigue, took a private pride in her granddaughter's brilliance. Behind closed doors, she whispered stories of Anne Boleyn's courage and shrouded truths about her daughter's fate in gentle camouflage. "Your mother," she would murmur, loved learning and dared to speak her mind. These lessons taught in secret, cloaked in legend, became Elizabeth I's guiding stars. Friendships were rare and fraught with caution. She observed older nobles with a wary eye, aware that smiles could hide ambition. Yet she formed a tentative bond with Mary Tudor's ladies and exchanged shy letters with her half-brother Edward. Then living at Windsor, these delicate relationships taught her that trust was earned and betrayal never far behind. Most haunting of all was the lesson of marriage. From her mother's fate, Elizabeth I learned that matrimony could be a death sentence. The notion of love entwined with power became inextricable from peril. She resolved early on to defy convention. She would remain unwed. This vow, born of trauma and shrewd calculation, laid the foundation for her later reign as the Virgin Queen. Thus, by the time Elizabeth I reached adolescence, she stood alone, stripped of title, shrouded in whispers, yet fiercely determined. The seeds of her legendary independence were sown in those years of solitude, study, and guarded companionship. In the crucible of her childhood exile, this future monarch forged a metal strong enough to hold aloft an empire, undaunted by the betrayals of the past, and resolved never to be anyone's pawn again. Part 3: Elizabeth I. The Virgin Queen's rise from darkness into light. Elizabeth I ascended the throne in 1558, inheriting a kingdom roiled by religious conflict and political intrigue. At age 25, she faced the daunting task of forging a stable government that could honor her father's break with Rome, while healing the wounds inflicted by her half-siblings' turbulent reigns. With characteristic shrewdness, she adopted a policy that was both firm and forgiving. High-profile ministers and courtiers who had played roles in the persecution of her mother, Boleyn, or in the downfall of Mary I's. Supporters were carefully managed, some were removed quietly from power. Others offered positions that kept them under watch, but spared their lives. This blend of justice and mercy sent a clear signal that Elizabeth I would neither tolerate treason nor indulge in vengeful purges. On matters of religion, Elizabeth I issued her famous Settlement Acts to establish a middle way between Anglican reforms and traditional practices. The Act of Supremacy restored the monarch as head of the Church of England, while the Act of Uniformity mandated a single Book of Common Prayer, one that retained enough familiar rituals to placate moderate Catholics. This via media approach drew both praise and outrage. Devout Protestants grumbled that vestiges of Catholic ceremony remained, while zealous recusants whispered of heresy. Yet Elizabeth I stood resolute, believing that a balanced church would serve as a unifying force for her realm. To consolidate her image, Elizabeth I turned to the arts. Court poets composed flattering odes, and musicians debuted grand anthems celebrating the new queen. Masques and plays performed at court featured allegories in which a wise virgin ruler restored harmony to a fractured land. Such spectacles played a crucial role in shaping public perception. During lavish showings on palace terraces, Elizabeth I would receive applauding crowds from behind a golden lattice, projecting an aura of majesty while keeping potential agitators safely distant, a political maneuver likened to a tiger prowling behind a mountain. Elizabeth I also redefined the role of women at court. She appointed female scholars as confidential advisors, sponsored the education of noble women in languages, philosophy, and the arts, and created a circle of learned ladies whose salons served as informal think tanks. In doing so, she became England's first true champion of women's intellectual advancement. Under her patronage, female writers and translators began to circulate works of theology and poetry, planting the seeds of what would later be called early modern feminism. Perhaps the most enduring testament to Elizabeth I's reign is the elliptical answer she provided to the tragedy of her mother's execution. Over her 45-year rule, she transformed England into a naval power, repelled the Spanish Armada, and oversaw a cultural flourishing that produced Shakespeare and Marlowe. By embodying the Virgin Queen, she elevated chastity and independence into symbols of national strength. Her refusal to marry, once a personal vow born of her mother's fate, became a statecraft strategy that maintained diplomatic ambiguity while preserving her personal autonomy. In every policy and performance, Elizabeth I made clear that the path opened by Anne Boleyn's tragic life would ultimately lead to glory rather than despair. Where Anne's hopes had ended in the shadow of the executioner's block, Elizabeth I's achievements shone as proof that a woman could rule with both intellect and grace. Her legacy answered Anne's sacrifice. The crown passed not into tyranny, but into the hands of a monarch whose reign would be celebrated as the golden age of England. As we turn the final page of our story, we find that Anne Boleyn's legacy persists long after crowns have tarnished and swords have fallen silent. From the moment her headless apparition was first sighted, wandering the battlements of the Tower of London, the headless ghost of Anne Boleyn has haunted English folklore. Witnesses over the centuries, soldiers on night watch, visitors drawn by macabre curiosity, even clergy have reported flickers of grey Tudor dress drifting through moonlit courtyards. These spectral sightings have inspired novels, feature films, and ghost tour excursions that pack eager tourists into cramped London streets. Anne's phantom presence fuels a thriving culture of spiritual tourism, where fervent believers and skeptical sightseers alike hope to glimpse history's most famous victim. Yet Anne's spirit also resonates in the modern struggle for women's rights. Feminists from the 1800s onward have claimed her as a symbol of resistance against patriarchal authority, celebrated alongside pioneers such as Mary Wollstonecraft and Emmeline Pankhurst. Anne Boleyn is invoked at rallies and in scholarly works as an early martyr whose intelligence and ambition challenged male supremacy. Her story, recast from scandalous queen to bold trailblazer, offers a rallying cry for gender equality. In art installations, street murals, and academic conferences, her name stands for the fierce insistence that women may wield power without shame. The 21st century has witnessed a further renaissance of Anne's image in academia and media. Historians have launched projects to re-examine her burial site beneath St. Peter ad Vincula, advocating for DNA analysis to confirm the identity of the remains discovered in 1876. Documentaries have charted her influence on the English Reformation and on notions of female sovereignty around the world. Each new study peels back layers of myth, revealing a woman whose real crimes were political and whose real virtues were courage and intellect. Beyond legends and scholarship, Anne Boleyn's life teaches enduring lessons for our own conflicted times. When power, religion, and gender collide, justice and conscience must remain unwavering. Her fate reminds us that legal systems can be twisted to destroy the innocent, and that society must guard against abuses cloaked in law or piety. Anne's story impels us to protect individual liberty, to strive for gender parity, and to speak truth to entrenched authority. Ultimately, the tale of Anne Boleyn, her rise, her fall, and her undying memory illuminates the human capacity for both cruelty and redemption. From the lonely tower cell to the echoing halls of scholarship, her presence endures as a testament to resilience in the face of injustice.